The strength of the old empires is waning, their status declining, and their colonies are breaking away. Faced by a slow death that sets in more or less immediately after the end of the Second World War, Britain and France know that they are no longer in a position to protect themselves. As they sense a red shadow falling over Europe, they realize they need allies, quickly. Allies who are willing to protect Europe from a Soviet takeover. They need an alliance.
Welcome to Season 1 of TimeGhost Cold War coverage in our series War to War, where we follow the wars that wouldn't end within a Cold World War, the beginning of the digital age, the atomic age, and the space age. I am Sebastian Brandstetter.
And I'm Anna Deinhard. Okay. So, as all of you know, defeating the Nazis was the glue that held the Allies together during World War II. Specifically, the greater powers, the UK, France, the USSR, and the United States, were closely together to bring an end to Nazi expansion.
Afterwards, however, Germany, of all things, once more becomes the center of global power politics and serves as a great illustration of the core motivators behind the actions of the four great powers of the day.
We have covered the future of occupied Germany in multiple other videos on this channel and the World War II channel. On TimeGhost, check out the Berlin Airlift episode, and on World War II, check out the German occupation special to get an in-depth account of what happens between Germany's surrender on May 8, 1945 and the end of Berlin Airlift in September 1949.
But since all of this is very relevant to today's story, the birth of NATO and the Warsaw Pact, we will cover them again in a lightning round. So, after Germany's defeat in May 1945, tensions quickly grow between the former allies. What once was cooperation becomes quiet confrontation. The US and the UK push for economic recovery, crucially including Germany, while France wants Germany weak and fractured, and the USSR focuses on extracting reparations and establishing control in the East.
Disagreements over occupation policy, economic aid, and currency reform lead to escalating friction. By 1948, the Soviets cut off all land and water access to West Berlin in an attempt to force the Western Allies to back down. In response, the US and UK launched the Berlin Airlift, flying in supplies for nearly a year. By now, it's beyond clear. The wartime alliance is over. And Germany, once again, is at the center of it all. It is not on the front line, it is the front line.
Okay, now we've pretty much caught up with what we've covered before in separate videos, and this should give you a pretty good understanding of what the mood is in 1948-1949. Now we're moving on to new things, to Dunkirk.
Dunkirk, not because it is the place of the Allied clusterfuck, but because of the Treaty of Dunkirk. While all this is going on, rising tensions between East and West, uncertainty about Germany and so on, there's also another worry that plagues Paris and London: security.
The two former unquestioned global superpowers fear becoming mere regional powers, and in face of Soviet might, some preparations need to be made. This is what the Treaty of Dunkirk is.
The Treaty of Alliance and Mutual Assistance between the United Kingdom and France, its real name, signed in Dunkirk on March 4th, 1947, is a treaty of alliance and mutual assistance between the two. Against whom? This is where things get interesting.
Determined to collaborate in measures of all assistance in the event of any renewal of German aggression, with the object of preventing Germany from becoming again a menace to peace.
Sure, Britain and especially France have genuine fears of Germany yet again, plunging the continent into a cataclysmic war. But here, the real enemy is someone else.
As French Minister of Armed Forces Pierre-Henri Taitgen pointed out, the French nation, notwithstanding appearances, in fact recognized that at present there is no purely German danger, and that they, the French military leaders, were quite ready to accept the American view that the only real present danger was from Soviet Russia.
The purposeful omission of this fact is due to diplomatic schemery. As we know, the situation with the USSR is already beyond tense in 1947-1948, so why risk antagonizing them further without any real gains to be made?
But then, the Dunkirk Treaty gets an offspring. On March 17, 1948, the Brussels Pact is signed. Now the Benelux states, Belgium, the Netherlands and Luxembourg, join. They too have valid reasons to bank on collective security. Alone, they stand vulnerable yet again against Germany or someone else.
And this time the language has changed. Given the ongoing escalation between East and West, together with the communist coup in Czechoslovakia in February of the same year as the final straw, the West is galvanized. Even France now accepts that appeasing the Soviets out of fear of provocation is no longer worth it.
Unlike the Dunkirk Treaty the year before, this was no longer aimed at Germany but at any enemy, meaning especially the Soviet Union. So, the 5 countries have thrown in their lot together in the face of the Soviet threat they believe can be gleaned on the horizon. In any case, these 5 also know something else. Even together, they stand basically no chance against Soviet military might, as former French Prime Minister and elder statesman Paul Reynaud points out.
The Western Union would be a mere outline with no substance and dangerous as well, since it would encourage illusions of non-existing strength.
Ah, yes. The Brussels Pact founds an organization which doesn't just serve in a defensive military capability, but also encourages economic and civil cooperation between the partners. That is the Western Union.
Anyways, that's why the Western Union wants the US to commit to military support. This is something easier said than done because of America's long-standing
true policy to steer clear of permanent alliances with any portion of the foreign world. It was already challenging enough for the Truman administration to get the Marshall Plan, the US Economic Recovery Program for Europe, through Congress. But eventually, as a mix of self-serving economic interests and out of a fear of communism, America's economic assistance manifested. Military assistance is another matter, though.
Here, too, 1948 brings yet another decisive development, the Vandenberg Resolution, or US Senate Resolution 239. In short, with this resolution, the US can now join defensive alliance in peacetime. Accepted by President Truman on July 2nd, 1948, it basically sets the stage for a transatlantic defensive alliance involving the United States of America.
Secret negotiations between the UK, Canada, and the US that already began beforehand now also involve Brussels Pact members. But not only that, other European states are also invited to talks: Denmark, Italy, Portugal, Iceland, and Norway, making 12 nations in total.
As a result, in the midst of the Berlin blockade on April 4th, 1949, the North Atlantic Treaty, NAT, is signed. By August 24th, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, emerges after ratification by all 12 signatories.
The Soviet reaction is surprisingly muted. Stalin even signals a willingness to negotiate regarding the Berlin blockade. This is likely because, for the moment at least, the USSR sees NATO as a political maneuver rather than military action, a conception that has some truth to it. At this time, and maybe still, NATO is just as political as it is militaristic in nature.
Moving on, NATO, right after birth, inherits the conceptual and bureaucratic groundwork as well as nascent defensive planning and infrastructure projects already established by the Western Union Defense Organization, WTW. Not that the US appreciates it though. To it, WTW is pretty much a joke.
But it's also not like NATO changes that immediately. At the beginning of its existence, NATO is like the Venus of Milo, all shape, no arms, as a contemporary jokester supposedly put it. And there are other problems plaguing the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Let us begin with the military strategy, or more precisely, the assigned responsibilities of the 12 members. The distribution of forces and the concept displeased all the allies, large and small alike.
This is because the United States is assigned strategic air support, the UK tactical air support, and the rest is supposed to provide the ground forces which will oppose the Soviets on the continent.
Now, it is true that the US should be in charge of strategic bombing. It has the largest suitable bomber force and, importantly, it is the only member that possesses nuclear capabilities. At the same time, one cannot fault the other members for disliking the thought of serving as cannon fodder while American airmen remain in relative safety above.
Another issue has to do with the US battle plan dating back to 1947. It envisions a disciplined retreat to the Pyrenees, with evacuation of troops from the continent to reconquer it at a later time. Essentially, the World War II playbook, only this time not because of major command failures, but by design.
Now, which major power and NATO member could have issues with that approach?
Might it be the French?
Yes, bullseye. Besides, another issue the French have is the fact that the most senior NATO military commander, Supreme Allied Commander Europe, SACEUR, is and always will be an American. In summary.
The Allies had to deal with an unequal partnership in which the United States, the dominant figure, had the controlling vote behind the screen of consensus. What can I say? There's a price to be paid for American assistance after all. Now, what might be a solution to some of these problems, like the paper tiger, the allocated responsibilities, or the battle plan?
Could it be the recruitment of another major European country with a strong industrial base and a large manpower pool? Maybe even a state known for military prowess, even if it was harnessed against all but 2 of the 12 NATO members twice in like 30 years.
Yes, that's right, we're talking about Germany. The UK and the US, surprisingly early after the end of World War II, beginning in 1948, want to co-opt German military power. Previously, the UK and the US already advocated for German reintegration into the global and European economy because of their shared vested interest in global trade, something that does not sit well with the French.
Now, driven by fear of Soviet aggression, they want to add military to economic reintegration, something that sits even worse with the French.
Also, the Americans note, it seemed incomprehensible that the Germans should benefit from NATO's protection through the presence of Allied forces without contributing to the common defense.
With the potentially added German manpower and German territory to the alliance, a feasible defense of Western Europe on the Rhine, something especially the French favor, seems plausible.
For the moment, however, the French cannot swallow that pill, a rearmed Germany, just yet.
Speaking of Germany, much happens there in 1949. The ever-diverging paths of East and West lead to creation of not one but 2 Germanies. Perhaps ironically, ultimately, the Soviet desire to prevent a Germany in the Western orbit and the Western desire to do the same but regarding the Soviet orbit are both fulfilled at the same time.
The West is first, with the creation of the Federal Republic of Germany on May 23, 1949, and the Soviets follow suit with the foundation of the German Democratic Republic on October 7th, the same year.
Now, however, there is a new fear originating from Germany. The West fears that should Germany, or at least a part of it, not be integrated into the West properly, bad things could follow. As Charles Bowen, serving US minister in Paris, puts it.
As soon as Germany recaptures her freedom of maneuver, she will inevitably begin to play the West off against the East, with the very real danger of coming to rest on the side of the Soviet Union. This is the nightmare of West European nations, and it should be ours as well.
Or, as George Kennan, US diplomat, phrases it, the re-emergence of that unilateral German strength which has proven so impossible for Western Europe to digest in the past.
But then, beginning on June 25th, 1950, the attention of the world is swiftly directed away from the German problem and towards Asia. The Korean War has begun, and if you want to know the ins and outs of this conflict, check out our Korean War channel. There, Indy delves into all that and more.
In today's context, the Korean War serves as a catalyst, a reckoning of the Western powers. Before, the primary fear had been Soviet subterfuge, infiltration, and plain electoral success.
Now it is T-34s clanking through the capitals of Western continental Europe. Many in NATO believe that Korea is a Soviet ploy to probe Western resolve and test the waters for a similar procedure in Europe.
The divided Germany and Europe appeared to be a constant temptation for communist intervention, just as the divided Korea had invited communist aggression in Asia.
European and especially German rearmament moves from an important issue to an imperative. There's just that problem with the French.
Still, they don't feel comfortable with the idea of unleashing a fully rearmed Germany on the continent. God forbid, what if Germany draws the alliance into a war because it wants to reclaim lost territory in the east? Or worse, what if Germany wants to take revenge on France?
But the French also acknowledge that something needs to be done. This is how the plan for the European Defense Community, the EDC, is born. A plan hatched in October 1950 by French PM René Pleven, hence also called the Pleven Plan. It is a diplomatic tightrope, wanting to both keep Germany controlled and fulfill US demands of German rearmament.
This community is another alliance very similar to the Brussels Pact, but there are also important differences. For one, it only includes European continental nations, Belgium, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, France, Italy, and crucially, West Germany.
Now, what exactly makes this plan different from just adding Germany to NATO, and how does it calm French fears?
Well, here, the individual members do not militarize, well, individually, they do so together. The EDC aims for nothing short of a common European defense force under French stewardship.
While this is going on, we need to take a brief detour to the Kremlin and Moscow and the presiding Soviet-in-chief, Joseph Stalin. In March 1952, he sends his Stalin notes to the West, in part because he wants to prevent the EDC or something similar from being realized.
In these notes, he proposes the following. All powers relinquish any stakes they have in Germany, the country is reunified, and then, by force of contract, pushed into a neutral position in Europe. As you can maybe guess, the US is not a fan.
For the US, the reasons are purely strategic. Neither an integrated Europe, nor an unified Germany, nor an independent Japan must ever become a third force or neutral bloc. As US Secretary of State Dean Acheson puts it,
neutralism is a shortcut to suicide.
So Stalin gets a no, and the EDC moves ahead unimpeded, and potential members sign the treaty on May 27, 1952. West Germany is now officially in a military alliance with France. Sometimes the world is funny.
It really is. Anyhow, now the only step left to realize a common European army to support NATO and hold the Soviets on the Rhine is the ratification of the treaty by all involved.
This goes smoothly, except in one country. Drumroll please, it is France.
That makes no sense.
I know, but there are good reasons. France fears the supranational structure of the EDC might get away from it, especially because of the cost of protecting its empire. Just look at the war in Indochina.
If you want to know more about that war, check out our videos about it right here on the TimeGhost channel.
So the war drains France's military resources, putting the French leadership position into question if it cannot bear the greatest burden. Which other country would be most likely to step in, especially because it does not have colonial entanglements distracting it?
Germany?
That's right. Also, by 1954, when the French reject the proposal, the Korean War has ended, as has the French Indochina War. And also, Joseph Stalin has died. All this has siphoned some urgency away.
Okay, I have two questions. When do we finally talk about the Warsaw Pact? And also, what happens now with the EDC dead in the water?
That's easy. The EDC failure does not mean an end to a Western defensive alliance. The USA and the UK are still very eager to harness German power. Also, the Warsaw Pact is a direct response to precisely that harnessing.
the focus returns to Germany becoming a proper NATO member. And France changes its mindset. For one, it has seen the limits of UK and US assistance in Indochina and now pursues a new alternative to ensure its great power status: nukes. They are France's path to independent deterrence and a way to
guarantee France that security advantage over the Federal Republic that had originally been sought with the unilateral discriminations over the Plevin Plan.
Anyways, as a result, on October 23rd, 1954, the Paris Agreement proceeds. According to the formula supported by the Americans from the very beginning, which France had originally wanted to avoid at all costs, a German army of 12 divisions and the inclusion of the Federal Republic of Germany in the Atlantic Alliance.
The Soviets do not like this. They have tried every trick in the book to prevent exactly this, and they are not stopping now.
In 1954, shortly after the aforementioned Paris Agreement, Vyacheslav Molotov, the Soviet foreign minister, makes a proposal: an all-European security system.
The idea is to prevent two defensive alliances poised against each other and replace them with a single European pact, eliminating the need for US and Canadian involvement. Molotov's attempt, however, to sow discord with NATO by excluding the USA and Canada from the European Security Conference was a miserable failure. In the end, only Soviet allies attended.
So, on May 9th, 1955, the Federal Republic of Germany becomes the 15th NATO member, Greece and Turkey beating them to it in 1952.
And now is when we finally get to the Warsaw Pact. It is a direct reaction to this. The raison d'être of the Warsaw Pact is the German accession to NATO.
Just 5 days later, on the 14th of May, the Treaty of Friendship, Cooperation and Mutual Assistance establishes the Warsaw Pact with 8 founding members: Albania, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, East Germany, Hungary, Poland, Romania, and the Soviet Union.
Now, what is the Warsaw Pact? NATO members believe that
the Warsaw Pact is a cardboard castle carefully erected over what most observers considered an already perfectly adequate blockhouse.
They mean it doesn't really change things. It was already expected in the West that these satellite states would join any Soviet war, even without a proper defensive alliance.
But its foundation was part of a genuine campaign to establish relations within and outside Eastern Europe on a more equal footing.
This is also in line with Nikita Khrushchev, Stalin's successor's desire to redraw Soviet foreign relations. Khrushchev wants to break Stalin's legacy, and the pact can serve as an easy way to reopen channels with spurned partners like Tito's Yugoslavia, which had rebelled against Stalin's oppressive hand, but also other nations besides.
There are also crucial differences between the Warsaw Pact and NATO. The Warsaw Pact Treaty is deliberately vague, giving the USSR leeway to interpret it according to its liking. And, importantly, the military structure is rudimentary, based largely on the already existing bilateral agreements between Moscow and its satellite states.
The underlying Soviet attitude regarding this, a more cooperative and consensus-based alliance, at least compared to the Warsaw Pact, is perhaps best exemplified by Soviet Supreme Commander Ivan Konev's incredulous report to Polish politicians in 1957 regarding the future of the Warsaw Pact.
What do you imagine? That we will make some kind of NATO here? The military strategy of the pact is, according to its nature, genuinely defensive. Moscow, too, sees the area of confrontation as pretty much the Iron Curtain, meaning in Germany. There is one last thing that the Warsaw Pact does, which greatly benefits Germany, as it would so happen.
No, not the FRG, the GDR. The pact, with it as an independent and acknowledged signatory, greatly expands the GDR's legitimacy. Until now, only Soviet bloc members have recognized it as a country. Maybe the Warsaw Pact will change that.
So, there we are in May 1955. two defensive alliances have definitively, visibly, and irreversibly manifested the rifts between former allies, which have been present ever since the Nazis were defeated, maybe even before then.
Europe, the world, is split into two competing blocs, I, the other, as the only real threat. This antagonism will be used by politicians in either bloc to convince common people that the common people of the other bloc aren't really people at all. They are the enemy, the despicable capitalists, or the monstrous communist. They want to see you and your way of life destroyed.
And for some reason, Germany plays yet another integral part in a conflict that, this time, does not set the world ablaze but freezes it over. The Cold War has now entered a new stage. Remilitarization is the chosen path, and paranoia and demonization are the dominant narratives.
To see how the Cold War develops as the struggle between these two blocs reaches a breaking point, stick with us right here, right on TimeGhost, to understand how a world that just survived the deadliest conflict in its history chose to restart hostilities pretty much immediately.
Also, check out our Korean War channel to better understand why it influenced the foundation of NATO, or our Berlin airlift episode on this channel, right here, to get an idea of post-war tensions in Germany, or our German occupation episode on the World War II channel to see how this all started out.
Also, there are our Indochina War episodes here on TimeGhost if you want to know why it attacks France so damn much.
Speaking of damn, we really do a lot of videos, don't we?
Yeah, we do. And it's all thanks to the TimeGhost army. Through your support, we get to unravel and shed light on some of history's most important moments. If you want to join the cause, head over to timeghost.tv or patreon.com.
Excelsior!